He is drawn forward, his feet lifting off the ground. He feels a strange sensation surround his body as everything goes dark. Then the hand loosened, and he falls. He hits solid ground hard. He groans, curling into a ball. He becomes still when he heard a faint sound nearby. Something was shuffling along the stone. Jason saw nothing in the darkness, but he could tell that whatever it was circling him. Slowly, Jason got into a crouching position. When he gathered his courage, he spoke. "Who are you?" he said. "Why did you bring me here?" The voice that answered was like a whisper speaking from a throat made of dust and ash. It was filled with venomous hate. "I know your kind," he said. "Miller blood." "You know who I am?" Jason said. "Hated broods," the voice said. Jason's heard a chittering sound which he knew must be the clacking of the thing's teeth. It made an unnerving ring in his ears. It made him think of a death rattle. "Broods," Jason said. "I don't understand." It gave a most unpleasant chuckle. Of course," it said. "For who can fathom the mind of the divine?" Jason started to feel around him, wanting to put some distance between him and the entity. It was clear that it held no love for him. Yet that wasn't the only reason. There was something he didn't like about the way the thing's teeth chattered. It was almost like it was tasting the air, like it was hungry. From the parched sound of its voice, it sounded like it hadn't eaten for a century. "What do you want?" Jason said, inching away. He needed to keep it talking so he could gauge where it was. "I was promised everything," he said, growling. "They took it away, those blasphemers." "What were you promised?" Jason said. "What did they take?" There was a long silence. Then the voice was right in front of Jason, blowing rank, stale air into his face. He almost retched at the stench. "The key to this house," he said. "The way to heaven. To my family." "Your family," Jason said. "In order to ascend to the realms of the divine, one must become as one with them," he said, cackling. "Behold, gaze upon your God." Light, Jason knew not from where, crept into the air. A figure illuminated before him. It was a man, but he could only make out the silhouette. He had his arms outstretched and his face was turned up, as if basking in the glow of the afternoon sun. The room around him began to gain shape as well. It was made of stone, but instead of rough walls, they were carved smooth. Arches and circular angles were cut into the walls and into the ceiling. Statues of strange and alien shapes appeared as well. Jason trembled at their awful visages. They had horns, talons, screaming mouths, and bulging eyes, all where it should be anatomically impossible. Tentacles, eyes, and tusks protruded from the statues in grotesque patterns and angles. They were the things of the most terrible nightmares. Behind the man appeared what could only be a ruined throne, crumbling and ancient. He saw the symbol from the wall carved into the backrest, though it was broken and missing pieces. A throne room, Jason thought. Maybe this was the high priest's chamber in his evil and profane temple. The light in the room continued to increase its illumination, yet it never became bright. The light was of an ominous glow that seemed to be of the nature of darkness. It was the antithesis of the comfort that normally light brings to dark places. "Gaze upon my majesty," the dark man said. "Worship me and tremble in my presence." The silhouette of the man was unveiled as the ominous light enveloped him. Jason almost screamed, and he could not turn his eyes away. The man's flesh was pure black. It also shined, and Jason thought back to when they first saw the condition of the house. It had the same sheen of fire that crystallized the molecules of wood. It was the same. The man's eyes were gone, and his opening jaw revealed nothing inside but a blackened skull. He was a walking corpse. Jason, crazily enough, might have been able to accept that. He'd seen the reality of the unexplainable, yet to his horror, the man's shape began to change. Yet the changes did not seem to be his own body. Shadows elongated from his form. They made arms and legs, all splayed with palms and feet pointed outwards in even intervals. It was as if they were all displayed in a gesture of worship. Shadow spikes grew from the man's head, and Jason thought at first that they were horns. Yet when the shape finished, he could not mistake what he saw. It was a crown. The man's burned face also changed. The sides of his head became distorted and sprouted two new faces. One was that of a hissing serpent that flashed its monstrous fangs. The other was of a ram with huge curling horns. All the while, the chattering death rattle sound continued. Like thousands of enamel hammers coming together over and over, the sound seemed to live in Jason's head. Clamping his hands over his ears did nothing. He felt himself starting to lose his sanity. Yet one thought he could not let go. In desperation, he spoke it out loud. "You're no god," Jason said. "You're no god, and I will never worship you." The man's faces turned down to glare at Jason. He could not see the features, but he felt the hatred as he stared back. "Do you want to see your family and friends again?" he said. Jason hesitated. He did not believe that this thing had any intention of helping him, not without a terrible price. When he did not answer, the thing continued. "I will let you go," he said, then lowered his voice to a menacing tone. "But I will keep the blood of heart." He wanted Megan? Jason shuddered to think of why he would have need of her. Thoughts of forbidden blood sacrifice or brutal vengeance came to mind. He pushed the thought aside with great effort. "Never," Jason said. The snake gave an angry hiss, and the ram a bellowing bleat. Then the man began to laugh, or what Jason thought was laughter, because all he was reminded of was the sound ash makes when it is ground together. "Then you shall all stay and worship me in the moving house," he said, taking a step towards Jason. He panicked. There was nowhere to go. The wall was at his back. The thing was coming towards him with slow, steady steps, cackling all the while. In that moment, Jason did the only thing he could think of. He got on his knees, clasped his hands together, and he did something he had not done since he was a very little kid. He prayed. He called out to God, and as soon as he uttered the name, the snake gave an agitated hiss. The ram uttered a wounded growl. "You dare pray in a place like this?" the man said, furious and moving faster now. "Silence!" Jason ignored him. He prayed more earnestly with all his soul. He called upon the name of the Lord, believing for the first time in the reality of God. It sounded so foreign to his own ears. His whole life he rejected any notion of the supernatural or the miraculous. Now here, at his darkest, most bleak moment, a miracle was all he could hope to rely on. "No!" the thing screamed, just as there was a flash of heat. Jason thought he was being burned, but his skin felt no pain. Then, through his closed eyes was a brilliant flash of light. Then there was silence. Jason waited, eyes closed tight. When nothing happened, he opened one eye, then the other. He gasped when he found himself outside, underneath the green canopy of forest. He cried out with joy and relief, but it was short-lived as he noticed that something was wrong. It was too quiet, just as it had been before they found the house. Was he still inside? Was this another trick? He looked around and quickly thought he saw something through the trees. He jumped up to his feet. Could it be someone's house? He had to go and see. He had to get help. His friends, for all he knew, were still stuck in the moving house. He clambered through the underbrush as quickly as his tired body could manage. Soon, he came into a clearing. No, it was an actual backyard. He whooped with joy, coming around to the front of the house. Then he stopped dead in his tracks, dropping his jaw in astonishment. They were all there. His friends, Amber, Derek, Kyle, Megan, Sophie, and even Ryan. All of them were in swimsuits, laughing as they played water games. Ryan and Sophie had water guns, and they chased Megan and Kyle, who were begging them to stop with innocent giggles. Derek and Amber were having a belly flop contest. They jumped up into the air and smacked against the water of the pool, making twin claps as the violence of their contact with the water's surface made it slosh over the edge. As Jason noticed them, Kyle and Megan both became very still. Derek and Amber did the same. Amber and Derek rose back to the surface of the pool in an eerily calm manner. Then, as one, they all turned to face him, their movements unnatural, almost mechanical, as if they were still learning how to move their bodies. Their faces, which had become blank and impassive, each grew the same, sickly sweet grins showing too much of their teeth. Black liquid began to ooze from their eyes, running down their cheeks. Jason blinked, and they changed. A scream clawed inside of Jason's throat as he realized that they were all dead. Their bodies were rotting and bloated. Their skin was bloodless and peeling, revealing gray, maggot-infested flesh underneath. They reached out their arms to him, fingers filthy with some sort of black soil, as if they had dug themselves out of cursed earth, right out of their graves. As one, they called to him, their voices pleasant, inviting and warm. "Come to us," they said. "Play with us. We can be together forever in the moving house." Jason gasped, unable to find words for the horrible scene before him. He took one shaky step backwards. They matched him with one step forwards. Derek and Amber's corpses climbed out of the pool, still moving in jerky, awkward spasms. Their smiles stayed splayed on their faces. However, their eyes burned with malice and ravenous hunger. "Join us, Jason," they said. "Join us in the moving house forever." Jason's heart felt like it was going to seize in his chest. It pounded with painful force. He couldn't move. He could barely breathe. They moved closer to him, arms outstretched. Their grins began to open, revealing something impossible. They had rows and rows of teeth inside their mouths. The teeth began to chatter, yet even more disturbing was the dark shape, shiny with slime wriggling at the back of their throats. "My God, something is alive in there," Jason thought, feeling his already punished psyche untangling further. Something is alive inside their dead bodies. It's controlling them. Soon, one of those things will be inside of me too, sliding and writhing like an eel from hell. With the thought of such a horrible fate, Jason finally turned and ran. Without even realizing it, he rushed up the porch steps of the house. He also didn't notice the doorknob turning on its own, then coming ajar, opening ever so slowly, as if in invitation, the moment he turned to run. The dead things that were his friends uttered shrill shrieks that sounded like grinding steel blades in his ears. He heard their shambling feet speeding up behind him. They struck the wood of the porch. He grabbed the door, just as he saw their shadows touch the threshold. With all his might, he swung the door, turning as he did so. Then he screamed. What he saw chasing him was not human in the least. His friends were now melded into one entity, an insane amalgamation of their arms, legs, mouths, and eyes, all writhing in putrid flesh. It was the same visage as the statues he had seen in the evil temple. It uttered a monstrous howl, reaching out to him, many jaws opening, revealing those innumerable teeth. They chattered in an unholy cacophony. The dark, slimy creatures inside the mouths struck out into the air, undulating, the tips all opened, revealing small, leech-like mouths. They began to speak in the voices of Jason's friends. "Jason, join us," the voices said. "Come worship with us forever in the moving house." Jason screamed again, then slammed the door shut, and the sound of the monster's evil supplications were cut off all at once. The silence was complete, and everything had become still. Jason's nerves finally frayed utterly, and he crumpled to the ground. He put his face in his hands, and for a long time, he wept. A while later, Jason startled awake. He did not remember falling asleep. His exhaustion and terror must have been so great that his body shut down. His stomach rumbled. How long had it been since he'd eaten? Even before the sleep was driven from his wakening mind, he heard subtle movement further inside the house. Something was coming his way. The house began to creak, and before long, the sounds of moaning wood took on a haunting tone. He recognized it immediately. Then he saw it. The glowing red mist was coming his way. Jason couldn't help but whimper as he tried to get to his feet. He stumbled, needing the wall for support. He didn't have any energy. He couldn't run this time. He doubted anyone or anything was coming to save him. The mist continued to make its way towards him. The creaking grew louder, becoming the screaming of 100,000 rusty hinges in his ears. His head vibrated with the sound. It brought him right back down to his knees. Thump, thump, thump. The entity's footsteps came forward, making the entire house shake in its wake. The red mist came into the room Jason was in. It swirled across the floor and then surrounded him. Yet it did not touch him. It paused an arm's length away. A shadow appeared on the wall. It was the elongated man, the one he had seen earlier, and the one Derek described on that night that Ryan was taken away. Now it was coming for him. Jason's exhausted mind was too tired to feel fear. He almost relished the idea of the chase being over. He was just too tired to care about anything. His friends, though, what about them? Hadn't he come in here to save them? Some hero I am, Jason said with a wry smirk. I couldn't do anything. He cursed the moving house under his breath. Nothing made sense here. The rooms, the beings, they all seemed loosely connected but also completely disjointed. It seemed to him as if everything was stories within stories. They were only connected by coincidence, or maybe not at all. He gave a dry chuckle. Then his laughter died when he finally saw it. A pale, long-fingered hand reached around the corner, wrapping the gnarled, bony digits across the wall. Jason recoiled at the sight. It was like seeing a perfectly preserved corpse. Pale skin, which was pulled tight enough to see the outline of bone underneath. It was a ghastly sight, and it made Jason's stomach turn. What he saw next was worse. The head appeared. It was gray, hairless, and Jason could see the thing's skull with terrifying clarity. A long tongue twisted out from its gaping mouth. It dripped long strings of saliva onto the floor. The pools hissed and steamed as if the fluid was superheated. Then, slowly, it turned its grotesque head towards Jason until its dead, white eyes fell upon him. The tip of the tongue opened, revealing another razor-mouthed leech. When Jason screamed, it wasn't because of the eyes themselves. Though they were terrifying, it was the way he was reflected in them. He saw himself clearly. He was dead in those eyes, a bloated, rotting corpse. Worst of all was the corpse's face. It was grinning at him with his own dead smile. The leech tongue slithered through the air towards him. It surrounded him, like a snake coiling around its prey. Yet Jason took no notice of it. He could only look up into the eyes that continued to show him his own grinning corpse. Then its eyes began to glow, and as soon as he saw that cold light, all his fears and worries washed away like mist against the rising of the morning sun. Jason actually smiled. Even as the tongue closed in and curled around his body, wrapping tightly, Jason's eyes glazed over, his face serene, as if he was having the most pleasant daydream of his life. The leech moved over Jason's face, settling on his lips, leaving a steaming slime trail as it did. It wriggled against them and pried them open. It made a cooing sound as Jason's jaws widened. Then, with a sickening, squelching sound, it slid inside. Jason's eyes rolled into the back of his head, and he began to convulse. Something came from deep inside the leech, out of the monster. It moved down its length until it came to Jason's invaded mouth. A moment later, it went inside, making the boy's throat bulge for a moment before the shape disappeared further into his body. Jason's convulsions intensified. In his mind, he heard the chattering of teeth. He also felt something, a terrifying presence that he couldn't see. It hid somewhere in the shadows of his thoughts. Somewhere very far away, he heard another sound. He thought he heard his name being called. He thought he heard screaming. Yet it was all far away. There was nothing but the eyes and the colorless light they held. In those eyes, Jason lived in the most wonderful dream, one he never wanted to awaken from.